So this video is all about equivalent fractions. What does equivalent mean? Equivalent means the same as or equal to. For example, a half is equivalent to 2/4. So here we got a half is equivalent to 2/4, and we can replace this part with a simple equal sign. So is equivalent to is the same as equals. So a half is equivalent to or is the same as 2/4. Okay, so if I've got a hole here, I've got a whole circle, and if I put a line right down the middle, I split it into two parts. So I've put it into halves, and we know that two halves make a whole. If I draw another circle the same size and I put a line right down the middle to split it into two halves, so I have two halves. If I then put a line across the middle that way, I've put it into four pieces, so I've got quarters. So I have 2/4 on this side and 2/4 on this side. Going back to this, I've said 1/2 is equivalent to, is the same as 2/4. So if I have a look, this 1/2 is the same as 2/4. So I need to colour in two of my quarters. And it's the same size is taken up. If I divide my whole into three parts, it goes into thirds. So I've got 3/3 make a whole. So what do you think is bigger, a third or a half? Which is bigger? Okay, so a half takes up more space of my whole than a third. So therefore the crocodile eats the bigger number, and the bigger number is the half. Okay, which do you think is bigger, 3/4 or 2/3? Which do you think is bigger? So if you look at the circle on the left, the 3/4 takes up more space of our whole when it's coloured in than our whole that's been coloured in 2/3. So what's this got to do with equivalent fractions? Well, by recognising if something is bigger than or smaller than, this can help us recognise when we found an equivalent fraction. Here we have a fraction rule, which we are going to have a go at making ourselves in a minute. But this can help us show what is the same size as a half. So if I look, I've got my whole at the top. What is the same as a half? So if I look down, I can see that 1/4 add 1/4 is the same size as a half. So that's 2/4 makes a half. If I go down again underneath the quarters, I can see 3/6 make a half. Okay, so the rule is any fraction that is the same as a half, the numerator is half of the denominator. Here are some examples. So I'm going to pick any number, it could be 100. So to make it equivalent to a half, the same as half of 100, 50. So 50 hundredths is the same as a half. 88, half of 88, 44. 44 88ths is the same as a half. 5 tenths is the same as a half. 4 eighths is the same as a half. These are all equivalent. And I can show you using these models here. So I've got whole, whole and whole. They're all the same size as best as I can. And this one I've split into two parts, so it's going to be my bottom number, my denominator is going to be 2. So I've got a half. So I'm going to colour in a half in a minute to show you that it's the same, even if I split the whole into 10 strips. I've got my denominator is 10, and then even I've got 100 pieces here, because it looks a bit like a 100 square. It's 100 out of 100. So it's actually 100 squares here. I'm not going to count them all, but I know because I've done 10 rows of 10. 10 times 10. So if I colour in half of my hole, and then because half of 10 would be 5, following that rule, 5/10 should be the same as a half, so it should have the same amount of space. Obviously that's 1 because it's 1/2. So let's see, so colour in 5 of these. There you go, coloured in 5 of those strips. So I've got 5 out of 10 coloured in, and it's the same as my half, same amount of space is coloured in. So then 100, so half of 100 is 50, following that rule. So a half should be 50 squares coloured in. So if I know that there's 10 squares in each of these, should need to colour in 5 of the rows. There we go. 50 of these squares coloured in. It's the same as 50 out of 100 as a half. Looks the same space as this. 1 out of 2 coloured in and 5 out of 10 parts. So they are all equivalent, even though the fraction looks completely different. But they follow one rule, that the numerator is half of the denominator. So 1 is half of 2, 5 is half of 10, and 50 is half of 100. Okay, so back to the fraction rule. These are a really good tool to help us learn equivalent fractions. So we're going to create one ourselves. So the next step is to cut the hole off. So just go straight on that line and cut it off as neatly as you can. Okay, so the next step is to create a half. So if you lightly meet it up and just touch it a little bit, don't completely fold it over, and then open it up, you should get a little line in the middle. Okay, so that is half on this side and half on this side. And it's quite a nice idea to write it as a fraction and in words, and then colour it in. Choose a different colour than what you coloured your hole, and colour the whole strip in again, and try and leave this so you can still read it well. Okay, so far we've got a hole, and we can say that 2 halves is equivalent, it's the same as a hole, because these two make one of those. Okay, so the next strip is going to be divided up into thirds. So you need to measure how long your piece of paper is. If it's an A4 piece of paper, it should be 29.7 centimetres. So if you put that into a calculator and then divide it into 3, because you're making it into 3 parts, it should give you, I think it's 9.9 centimetres each third should be. So the next strip, we're going to divide it into quarters now. So we've got our half mark still here. So we can use that because if we think about it, the denominator is an even number, so it should go completely half. And then we can even half it again. So just fold that in to the middle. Make sure it's lined up. And on the other side as well. Like that, and then if we open it out, it should be divided equally into 4 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the last two, I'm going to leave it up to you. I'm going to do sixths and eighths, just because quarters and halves relate to eighths, because 2 eighths go inside one of these. and also 2/6 go inside a third. But if you wanted to make a huge fraction rule and you wanted to add some more in, I know it's quite time consuming, but it can be an ongoing thing. You can add more as long as this is the same width. So I'm going to finish off my fraction rule, and then I'm going to put up some questions which can help you. You can use your fraction rule to help you solve them. So it might be 2/3 is the same as how many sixths. It could be 3/4 is the same as how many twelfths. So if you make one of these strips and you divide it into 12 pieces, that can be really helpful as well. So I'll finish off the fraction rule and then I'll put some questions up for you. So how I worked out 1/8 of my piece of paper was I halved a quarter. Half a quarter is 1/8. So here is my fraction rule at the moment. I might add to it, but I have rearranged some of mine slightly. So I've got a hole at the top, 2 halves, and then because I wanted to show how many quarters make a half, how many eighths make a half, and they work quite nicely next to each other. And then I've gone on to thirds, sixths, and twelfths. Now, my fraction rule isn't perfect, and I doubt yours is either with the sizing, but if we try to be as accurate as we can with our cutting and our measuring, then it's as best as it's going to be. So let's get using our fraction rules. So we've made a tool, a resource to help us solve different fraction problems when we're trying to find equivalent fractions. So you can use the fraction rule if you want at the top, or you can use your own fraction rule to sort out these missing numbers. I'll do the first 3 with you. So number 1, a half is the same as, and then it wants to look at our quarters. So how many quarters make a half? We know this. So I've got my half out, and then I've got my quarters here. So 1, 2. So that numerator will be 2. 2 quarters is the same as a half. Okay, the next question. 1/3 is the same as how many sixths? So I've got my thirds. I'm going to get my sixths. So 1, 2. So that numerator will also be 2. It's quite hard to do with one hand, but 2/6 are equal to 1/3. And for number 3, 2/3 is equal to how many sixths? So I've just got my other third out, so I've got 2/3, and if 2/6 makes a third, then you can do this if you want to, but lots of you will know. Another 2 for that third, so we got 2, 4. 4/6 make 2/3, so the numerator would be 4. Okay, so now it's your turn. I will put the questions on the screen again, so pause it and have a go. Okay, so it's an extension if you want to have a go at. You can use your fraction rule to help you. Pause the screen and then I will put the answers on after.